In the 21st century, our world is more interconnected than ever before, yet it often feels like we are standing on a fragile precipice. We've made extraordinary progress in science, technology, and society, but in our pursuit of advancement, we've also fractured our world. Climate change, pollution, wars, and social inequalities. Each of these crises alone presents a daunting challenge. However, when combined, they amplify one another, placing our very way of life at risk. The question isn't just whether we'll confront these issues, it's whether we'll reach a point where they spiral beyond our control. These are the tipping points. A tipping point occurs when a system, whether ecological, social, or technological, reaches a threshold, after which it rapidly and irreversibly shifts into a new state. This term was coined by sociologist Morton Grodzins in the 1960s to describe racial segregation patterns in American cities, but it has since been applied to a wide array of phenomena. Today, it serves as a grim metaphor for the delicate balance of life on Earth. Many tipping points are already in motion, pushed to the edge by human activity. Once crossed, these systems will begin to unravel, creating cascades of effects that will threaten not just isolated communities, but the entire planet. For a more graphical illustration, we'll place these issues in situ to the doomsday clock, a symbolic measure of how close humanity is to global catastrophe. In 2024, the clock stands at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been in history. This reflects not just singular dangers, but the compounded threats we now face: nuclear risks, climate breakdown, and emerging technologies. Like a fractured mirror, each crack is connected to others, and as those cracks spread, so too does the risk of a shattered future. The doomsday clock is a symbolic representation of humanity's proximity to global catastrophe, created by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists in 1947. Set to reflect the likelihood of existential threats such as nuclear war, climate change, and disruptive technologies, the closer the clock is to midnight, the nearer we are to a global disaster. Initially conceived to warn of the dangers of nuclear conflict, the clock has since evolved to include other man-made threats. The time on the clock is determined by the Bulletin's Science and Security Board, which includes a panel of scientists and experts in nuclear risk, climate change, and emerging technologies. Updated annually, the clock serves as a powerful reminder of the urgent need for global cooperation and action to mitigate these risks. Over the years, it has fluctuated based on geopolitical and environmental events, with 2023 marking the closest setting to midnight in its history, largely due to the escalation of nuclear tensions, climate crises, and disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence. In this video, we'll examine the key tipping points threatening our world. Each crisis is not just a challenge in its own right, but a part of a larger puzzle. Together, these issues paint a picture of a fractured world where the tipping points are numerous and the outcomes uncertain. But there is hope. By embracing reason, compassion, and civic virtue values central to the Renaissance spirit, we can tip the balance back in our favor. The solutions to these challenges require not only individual action, but collective cooperation on a global scale. Let us begin by examining one of the greatest threats of our time: climate change. Let's start our discussion with climate change. Climate change is not a distant possibility. It is here, now, reshaping our world with a terrifying speed. Wildfires scorch landscapes once thought immune, and hurricanes strike with unprecedented ferocity. Each heatwave, each flood, is a reminder that we may already be too late to reverse the most severe consequences of climate change. Yet, as frightening as it is, climate change is only part of the broader tapestry of a fractured planet. At the heart of the climate crisis are tipping points, critical thresholds beyond which ecosystems shift irreversibly. As reported by European space agencies in their recent article on the Global Tipping Points report, 5 major systems are on the brink: the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets, permafrost regions, coral reefs, and crucial ocean circulations like the Labrador Sea Gyre. Once these systems cross their tipping points, the changes will be unstoppable. The melting of the Greenland ice sheet, for example, would raise sea levels by several meters, permanently flooding coastal cities worldwide. The collapse of coral reefs would devastate marine biodiversity and the livelihoods of millions dependent on fisheries. These are not theoretical concerns, they are unfolding now. The doomsday clock reflects this stark reality. In 2024, we are closer to global catastrophe than ever before, largely due to climate inaction. Each year we fail to act, we edge closer to midnight. The tipping points of climate change are not just scientific thresholds, they are moral ones as well. If we fail to address the root causes carbon emissions, deforestation, overconsumption, we may tip not only the climate but civilization itself into collapse. Yet there is hope. To avoid these tipping points, we must act decisively. Individuals can reduce their carbon footprints, but the more critical action lies with governments and industries. Ending fossil fuel dependence, transitioning to renewable energy, and preserving ecosystems must be priorities. We must also support international climate agreements that hold nations accountable. The clock is ticking, but it is not yet too late. By engaging in this fight as active citizens, we uphold the Renaissance spirit, reason, compassion, and civic virtue. Next, let's move to pollution. Imagine walking along a once pristine beach, only to find it littered with plastic debris. The ocean waves that once teemed with life are now choked by discarded waste. Or you pop to the beach in England to get a nice morning swim, only to start to develop symptoms of norovirus or the many other diseases in the English waters by afternoon. This is not a far-off dystopia, but the reality of today, where pollution has become a pervasive threat to both ecosystems and human health. From the air we breathe to the food we consume, pollution touches every aspect of our lives, and like climate change, it is pushing us toward dangerous tipping points. Plastics, for instance, are now found in every corner of the Earth, from the deepest ocean trenches to the Arctic ice. Microplastics have infiltrated our bodies, making their way into our bloodstreams and organs and our brain. BPA, a chemical found in plastics, disrupts endocrine functions, posing long-term health risks. In areas like Cancer Alley in the United States, communities live in the shadow of refineries, exposed to toxic chemicals that increase cancer rates dramatically. Yet, plastics and chemicals are only one piece of the puzzle. Industrial pollutants, heavy metals, and pesticides are contributing to widespread environmental degradation, leaving no ecosystem untouched, including our own bodies. Are these the reasons why sperm counts have dropped so much in the past few decades? What makes pollution particularly dangerous is that it exacerbates other crises, such as climate change and biodiversity loss. Pollutants warm the atmosphere, acidify oceans, and poison the very soils needed to grow food. The tipping point here comes when ecosystems can no longer recover. When the Earth's lungs, our forests, oceans, and wetlands are too damaged to absorb carbon dioxide, the effects of climate change are accelerated. We are already seeing the collapse of coral reefs due to pollution and rising temperatures, a warning sign of what's to come. The doomsday clock ticks closer to midnight, not just because of nuclear risks, but because of the environmental damage we continue to inflict. The cascading effects of pollution reach deep into every system: economic, environmental, and social. As pollution degrades ecosystems, it forces migration, creates health crises, and destabilizes food and water supplies, all of which contribute to global insecurity. The tipping points of pollution are already being crossed, with irreversible harm done to many ecosystems. For more information, watch A Trump Win is the Endgame for Climate Change. Yet again, the solution lies in our hands. Individuals can reduce their use of plastics, demand cleaner products, and support companies committed to sustainability. Governments must enforce stricter environmental regulations, ban single-use plastics, and invest in waste management infrastructure. Global cooperation is essential to ensure that pollutants do not respect borders. If we fail to address this, we will find ourselves living in a poisoned world, one where the damage to both human and environmental health is too great to reverse. This is a moment for civic action, for reasoned debate, and for compassion toward both our planet and future generations. Next, let's discuss food systems and water availability. Imagine a world where grocery store shelves are empty, where droughts dry up fields, and where communities are left without access to fresh water. This is not a far-fetched scenario, but a growing reality in many parts of the world. Food and water are the foundations of life, and yet these vital resources are becoming increasingly vulnerable. Climate change, pollution, and geopolitical conflicts are pushing global food and water systems to the brink, creating a tipping point that could lead to widespread hunger, unrest, and displacement. The links between water shortages, food insecurity, and other crises are impossible to ignore. In regions already suffering from conflict like the Middle East and parts of Africa, water is scarce, exacerbating tensions and fueling wars over access to this most basic resource. Climate change is driving extreme weather events from severe droughts to catastrophic floods, which disrupt agricultural production. The result? Global food shortages and skyrocketing prices that hit the poorest communities hardest. As harvests fail, millions are at risk of starvation, especially in developing nations that rely on imports of staple crops. But food and water shortages are not just a problem for distant countries, they are global concerns. In the US, the water levels of the Colorado River, a lifeline for millions, are at historic lows, threatening agriculture and water supply in multiple states. In China and India, two of the world's most populous countries, groundwater supplies are being depleted at unsustainable rates. As more regions face water scarcity, agriculture suffers, leading to a dangerous feedback loop where food production diminishes and hunger rises. The tipping point is approaching quickly. According to climate models, if global temperatures rise by more than 1.5 degrees C, we will see dramatic shifts in rainfall patterns, making some areas unbearably arid and others prone to devastating floods. This will further stress our global food and water systems, pushing them past the point of recovery. The crisis is exacerbated by pollution-heavy metals, pesticides, and plastics infiltrate water sources, making what little water is available often unsafe to drink. On top of that, large agribusinesses such as Monsanto push monoculture farming and genetically modified crops, which deplete soils and reduce biodiversity, making food supplies even more vulnerable to collapse. The doomsday clock ticks closer to midnight because these environmental challenges also have profound social consequences. Water and food shortages lead to mass migrations as people flee uninhabitable regions, putting strain on neighboring countries and creating new flashpoints for conflict. As crops fail, economies falter, leading to political instability that ripples across borders. The destabilization of global food systems could be the final tipping point that leads to societal breakdowns across the world. So what can be done? On an individual level, we can take steps to reduce food waste, support sustainable agriculture, and push for better water conservation practices. Governments must prioritize investments in infrastructure to make water use more efficient and promote regenerative farming practices that restore soil health and biodiversity. International cooperation is critical. Countries must work together to manage shared water resources and implement climate action that addresses the root causes of these shortages. The time for half measures has passed. Without urgent global action, we will face a future where water wars and widespread hunger become the norm. This tipping point, like the others we've discussed, reflects the interconnectedness of our global crises. Climate change, pollution, and resource depletion all feed into each other, creating a cascade of challenges that can only be solved through cooperation and compassionate action. The Renaissance spirit teaches us that reason and empathy must guide our choices, and nowhere is this more crucial than in ensuring access to the basic necessities of life, food, and water. War is the most immediate and violent way that the fractures in our world manifest. The Russia-Ukraine war, raging since 2022, has become more than just a geopolitical conflict. It is a flashpoint for global instability. The stakes are high, and the risks extend far beyond the region's borders. At its heart, this war threatens to tip us into nuclear disaster, a possibility that has hung over the world since the dawn of the atomic age. The war has already resulted in immense human suffering, millions of refugees, thousands of civilian deaths, and the devastation of entire cities. But the conflict is not confined to Ukraine. It has destabilized global food supplies, with the war disrupting grain exports from one of the world's largest breadbaskets. Nations across Africa and the Middle East, reliant on Ukrainian grain, face food insecurity, exacerbating hunger and poverty, especially in places like Sudan where they are facing famine and genocide. As the war drags on, global tensions rise, bringing us closer to the nightmare scenario of nuclear escalation. The tipping point here is frighteningly clear. Nuclear arsenals, once thought to be Cold War relics, are back in focus. Russia, a nuclear superpower, has made veiled threats of using tactical nuclear weapons. The mere suggestion of this crosses a psychological tipping point in international relations. What was once unthinkable becomes a looming possibility. If a single nuclear weapon were to be used, the global response would be catastrophic. It could spark a chain of retaliations, pulling the world into a new age of nuclear brinkmanship, potentially triggering World War III. The doomsday clock has never been closer to midnight, and much of that risk is driven by the threat of nuclear war. Historically, it was set at 2 minutes to midnight during the Cold War, reflecting the tense standoff between the US and the Soviet Union. In 2024, with the Russia-Ukraine war as a primary factor, we stand at 90 seconds to midnight. The world watches with bated breath, hoping that cooler heads will prevail. But the escalation of this war, combined with other global conflicts, could tip us into a catastrophe that we may never recover from. What can be done to mitigate this? On an individual level, understanding and supporting diplomatic efforts for a just peace is crucial. It is easy to become desensitized to distant conflicts, but public pressure on governments to pursue peaceful solutions can make a difference. Governments and international bodies, such as the United Nations, must work tirelessly to de-escalate tensions, enforce arms control agreements, and offer paths to diplomatic resolution. At the same time, humanitarian efforts must be scaled to help those suffering from the war's direct impacts: refugees, displaced families, and communities struggling with food shortages. Democracies must continue to support other democracies against outside encroachment, and efforts should be underway to de-escalate tensions between other countries. We all live in this world together, and we need to cooperate and work together. We all know what happens when we don't. A just peace includes protecting the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people. Our channel, The Renaissance Spirit, truly believes that all people have the right to their own identity and sovereignty, whether that sovereignty is placed locally in a national body or in a supranational organization like the UN or NATO, or a supranational state like the European Union. For more information, watch my mini video. If Ukraine falls, what's next? In this fractured world, wars like the one in Ukraine are not isolated. They ripple across borders, economies, and societies, worsening other crises. The nuclear threat, whether the destruction of a nuclear power plant or an all-out nuclear batter, are stark reminders of the fragility of our existence. Reason, compassion, and civic virtue must guide our response. By advocating for peace and understanding the global interconnectedness of conflict, we can hope to step back from the nuclear abyss and inch the doomsday clock away from midnight. Next, let's move to the Middle East. Few regions embody the idea of a fractured world more than the Middle East. For centuries, it has been a crucible of religious, political, and ethnic tensions. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has escalated once again since the deadly attack on October 7, 2023, has turned Gaza into a flashpoint of humanitarian crisis. With each passing day, we see images of devastation, buildings reduced to rubble, families displaced, and an ever-growing death toll. This war, like many others, is a tragedy, but its ripple effects go far beyond the borders of Israel and Gaza. Now, Lebanon and Iran are involved. At the heart of the current crisis is a history of deeply entrenched grievances, dating back to the early 20th century and beyond. The formation of Israel in 1948, the displacement of Palestinians, the wars fought over territory and sovereignty, all have contributed to an ongoing cycle of violence that seems to have no end. What we are witnessing now is not just a conflict over land, but a tipping point in a region that has long been on the edge of catastrophe. With each bomb dropped, with each life lost, we risk tipping further into widespread regional instability, and even a wider international conflict. The humanitarian crisis and genocide in Gaza is severe, with famine and genocide looming over the population. Blockades have cut off supplies of food, water, and medicine, creating unbearable living conditions for the 2 million residents trapped in the Strip. The lack of access to basic necessities has pushed Gaza to the brink of collapse, and the international community faces a moral tipping point. Will we stand by and watch as millions suffer, or will we take collective action to address this atrocity? The broader danger is that conflicts like this can escalate into something much worse. If more neighboring countries are drawn into the fight, or if proxy powers become more deeply involved, the war could spread. Moreover, the Middle East holds strategic geopolitical significance. Any escalation in this region affects global oil supplies, international security, and alliances. The reverberations of war in the Middle East are felt around the world. The doomsday clock also reflects the danger of this conflict. The more unstable the region becomes, the closer we come to a global tipping point. Wars in the Middle East have historically had far-reaching consequences, often triggering economic crises, waves of migration, and terrorist activity that threaten the safety and stability of nations far from the epicenter of the conflict. We have already seen how this conflict disrupts global markets and food supplies, raising concerns of wider-reaching impacts. What can be done to de-escalate the situation? First, a ceasefire must be called immediately. Humanitarian aid must be allowed to flow into Gaza to prevent the loss of more innocent lives. International leaders must work together to broker peace talks that address the root causes of the conflict, recognizing both Israel's right to exist and the Palestinian people's right to a sovereign state. But this cannot be done in isolation. The world must also address the broader drivers of instability in the Middle East: economic inequality, lack of access to education and resources, and the failure of international institutions to enforce human rights. Without addressing these underlying issues, peace will remain elusive, and the region will continue to simmer, threatening to boil over again and again. For more information on this topic, please watch The Importance, Mandate, and Promise of the United Nations that goes on a deep dive into the Israel-Palestine tragedy. In the Middle East, we find ourselves at a critical tipping point. History has shown that without deliberate and concerted action, the region's conflicts only grow more entrenched, leading to greater suffering and instability. Now is the time for reason, compassion, and international solidarity. By demanding justice and peace, we uphold the values of the Renaissance spirit, working toward a future where war and genocide are no longer the defining features of human existence. Next, we'll move to one of the most controversial issues of our time, mass migration. As the world grapples with the crises of climate change, war, and resource scarcity, an unavoidable consequence is the mass movement of people. Immigration, driven by a range of factors from environmental disasters to political instability, is accelerating. While migration has always been part of human history, what we are witnessing now is unprecedented in scale. Entire communities are being displaced by conflict, famine, and rising sea levels. This wave of migration is reshaping borders, economies, and societies, and it's creating yet another tipping point in our fractured world. To hit the point home, according to a 2023 article by the Zurich Group, there could be as many as 1.2 billion refugees from climate alone by 2050. Shanghai, New York, Bangladesh, New Orleans could all be partly submerged in water by 2050. The reasons people are leaving their homes are interconnected with the issues we've already discussed. Climate change is making certain areas uninhabitable, whether due to extreme heat, rising sea levels, or desertification. In places like Central America and Sub-Saharan Africa, farmers are finding it impossible to grow food, driving rural populations towards cities and eventually across borders in search of survival. Wars, like the conflict in Ukraine or the violence in the Middle East, have forced millions to flee, creating a global refugee crisis. In 2024, more than 100 million people are displaced worldwide, the highest number in recorded history. Yet immigration is not just a symptom of global crises. It is also a source of renewal and opportunity, a movement that has historically enriched the nations that receive new populations. Human migration is part of our shared history. Tens of thousands of years ago, our ancestors left Africa in waves, spreading across continents and creating the world's diverse cultures. We are biologically one race, 99.9% of our DNA is the same. The Renaissance spirit recognizes this shared humanity and teaches us that migration has always been a force of progress and growth. But today, immigration is often seen through the lens of fear and division. Xenophobia, racism, and political polarization have made it harder for many societies to accept immigrants, despite the clear need for labor and the benefits of cultural exchange. Anti-immigrant sentiments have risen in countries across the globe, with refugees and migrants often scapegoated for economic problems that are more accurately linked to systemic issues like inequality and corruption. This fear-driven response to immigration threatens to tip us into a more divided and hostile world, where the other is seen as a threat rather than a fellow human being. Let's take a moment to look at the plight of Haitian immigrants seeking refuge in places like Springfield, Ohio, and Charleroi, Pennsylvania, which highlights the desperate circumstances that drive individuals to leave their home countries. Faced with lawlessness, gang violence, poverty, and political instability in Haiti, many fled their homeland in search of safety and a better life. Sometimes as individuals or as entire families. Upon arriving in these American towns, they found not only a refuge but also the opportunity to contribute to their new communities. The arrival of Haitian immigrants has revitalized Springfield and Charleroi, bringing fresh perspectives, cultural diversity, and economic growth. These newcomers have opened businesses, enriched the local culture, and filled critical labor gaps, benefiting both themselves and the existing residents. Lies about eating pets abound, and talk about their lifestyle fills the gossip networks. Most Haitian migrants try to embrace their new community and live Spartan lives in America, not only saving for their survival in their new land, but for the hope that they can bring their families with them one day. And let's not forget the money that they send to their families back in their native lands, for if they left the poverty, strife, and destitution as they see it, what did they leave their family who they left behind? These remittances are a large part of much of the world's economy. Rather than being vilified, immigrants should be respected and honored for their courage and resilience. Their stories serve as a powerful reminder that immigration is not merely a challenge to be managed, but a profound opportunity for growth and connection that strengthens the fabric of our society as well as its resiliency. The tipping point we face with immigration is twofold. First, we must decide how to treat those who are seeking safety and opportunity. Will we respond with compassion, integrating them into our societies and building stronger communities through diversity? Or will we close borders, build walls, and stoke division? Second, we must address the root causes of migration. This means tackling climate change, preventing conflicts and improving global governance so that people are not forced to leave their homes in the first place. The doomsday clock reflects this tension. Societies that fail to manage immigration humanely and responsibly are at greater risk of internal conflict. History shows us that intolerance and exclusion lead to instability, often spiraling into civil unrest or even war. On a global scale, the refusal to cooperate on migration policy fuels inequality and sows the seeds of future conflicts. A society that turns its back on those in need risks becoming more fractured, more isolated, and more vulnerable to the very problems it seeks to escape. What is to be done? On a personal level, we must reject xenophobia and advocate for policies that protect equality and the rights and dignity of all people, regardless of where they are from. Governments need to create legal frameworks for immigration that are fair, humane, and economically beneficial. International cooperation is essential to address the root causes of forced migration, from supporting peace initiatives to combating climate change and poverty. Finally, we must recognize the deep connections that bind us all together. The Renaissance spirit calls for us to see beyond borders, to embrace our shared humanity, and to work for a world where no one is forced to flee their home out of desperation. In a time when migration will only increase, the choice before us is clear. We can either live in fear and division, or we can embrace reason, empathy, and unity to build a better future for all. Next, we will discuss the widening chasm of wealth and opportunity and inequality. Inequality is a silent force tearing at the seams of our fractured world. The divide between the wealthy and the rest of society has grown wider than ever in recent decades. While technological advancements and economic growth have lifted millions out of poverty, the benefits have not been shared equally. A small percentage of the population controls an overwhelming majority of the world's wealth, while billions of people struggle to meet basic needs. This concentration of wealth and power has far-reaching consequences, fueling social unrest, political instability, and the erosion of trust in institutions. In America alone, according to a 2024 August MarketWatch survey, nearly 2/3 of Americans report living paycheck to paycheck. That is much worse than some countries and a lot better than others. At the heart of this issue is greed, an age-old problem that has been magnified in the 21st century by unchecked capitalism and corporate influence. From inflation and price gouging, to worker exploitation and corruption, to buyouts, bailouts, or the 2021 Texas blackouts, the pursuit of profit often comes at the expense of human dignity and the common good. Companies prioritize shareholders over workers, leading to stagnating wages, unsafe working conditions, and a lack of job security. Meanwhile, essential services such as education, housing, healthcare, and infrastructure are underfunded, leaving the most vulnerable to bear the brunt of inequality's consequences. The tipping point here is dangerously close. When societies become too unequal, social cohesion breaks down. We are already seeing the warning signs: mass protests, rising crime rates, and increasing political polarization. People are losing faith in the ability of governments and institutions to provide for their well-being. This breakdown of trust, fueled by inequality, is a key driver of political extremism and authoritarianism, as disillusioned populations seek radical solutions to their problems. The social fabric is unraveling, and if left unchecked, inequality could tip us into widespread unrest and even societal and democratic collapse. The relationship between inequality and other global crises cannot be ignored. Climate change and pollution disproportionately affects the poor, who have fewer resources to adapt to environmental disasters. Food and water shortages hit low-income communities the hardest, exacerbating existing inequalities. In turn, inequality fuels conflict, as those who are marginalized become desperate and disenfranchised. This interconnectedness creates a vicious cycle where inequality worsens other crises, and those crises deepen inequality, pushing the world closer to a breaking point. The doomsday clock is a reflection of more than just technological or environmental threats. It also tracks societal instability. The widening gap between rich and poor, combined with the erosion of social safety nets and growing distrust in political systems, contributes to the global sense of unease. Historically, periods of extreme inequality have led to revolutions and wars, and today's situation is no different. Without action, the inequality crisis could tip us toward conflict on a global scale, as societies become more polarized and divided. What can we do to reverse this trend? At the individual level, we must demand better from our governments and corporations. Advocacy for fair wages, worker rights, and progressive taxation is essential in addressing economic inequality. On a societal level, we need to invest in education, healthcare, and social programs that provide opportunities for all, not just the privileged few. Governments must crack down on corporate greed, corruption, and tax evasion, while implementing policies that promote income redistribution and equal access to resources. We must return to the virtues of civic responsibility, compassion, and reason. By embracing these ideals, we can begin to close the gap between rich and poor, creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Inequality is not inevitable. It is a result of human choices, and by making different choices, we can tip the scales toward a more equitable and harmonious world. In a time when wealth and opportunity are increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few, it is up to us to push back, to demand fairness, and to ensure that the promise of progress is shared by all. Only then can we hope to heal the fractures in our world and build a future rooted in justice and compassion. To learn more about these topics, watch our video, Americans Don't Like to Talk About Money, and its sequel, Flipping the Bill, How the Rich Screw You. Once you've seen those two, take the quiz to see if you're a Renaissance spirit. Next, our discussion takes an ominous turn with the perils of technology, AI, bioweapons, and the shadow of the future. In the 21st century, humanity finds itself on the precipice of a technological revolution. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and other groundbreaking innovations offer unparalleled potential to improve lives, or at least the lives who can afford them. However, these same technologies also pose existential risks if not managed wisely. The rapid pace of development has outstripped our capacity to fully understand the consequences, and we are approaching yet another tipping point, one where these powerful tools could either enhance human civilization or drive it to the brink of collapse. One of the most concerning areas is artificial intelligence. AI systems are being integrated into nearly every aspect of modern life, from healthcare to finance to military operations. While AI holds the promise of solving complex problems, it also raises profound ethical and safety concerns. Autonomous weapons, fueled by AI, could revolutionize warfare in terrifying ways, making conflicts deadlier and harder to control. Additionally, the automation of jobs could lead to widespread unemployment, deepening inequality, and destabilizing societies already on the edge. The tipping point with AI lies in how we choose to regulate and integrate this technology. Unchecked, AI could disrupt economies, exacerbate social divides, and even pose a direct threat to humanity if superintelligent systems become uncontrollable. The fear of an AI-driven dystopia is not science fiction. Leading thinkers like Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk have warned of the dangers of developing AI without proper safeguards. The doomsday clock reflects this growing anxiety, with the continued advancement of AI technologies pushing us ever closer to midnight. The development of autonomous weapons alone could spark a new arms race, leading to a world where machines make life or death decisions, a terrifying prospect for global security. Another emerging threat is the misuse of biotechnology. Advances in gene editing, synthetic biology, and bioweapons could unleash horrors unlike anything we've seen. CRISPR technology, while revolutionary for medicine, could also be weaponized to create designer viruses or genetically modified organisms that spread uncontrollably to targeted populations or entire continents. These bioweapons could be released intentionally by rogue states or terrorist groups, or they could be unleashed accidentally due to poor regulation or oversight. The fragility of global health systems, as exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, shows just how vulnerable we are to biological threats. The tipping point here is not only in the creation of these technologies, but in their global governance. We need international cooperation to set strict guidelines and ethical boundaries around the use of AI and biotechnology. Without this, we risk a future where technological advancements spiral out of control, leading to catastrophic consequences. Just as nuclear weapons have altered the landscape of global security, so too could AI and bioweapons if left unchecked. So what can we do to prevent these potential disasters? First and foremost, we must demand transparency and accountability from governments and corporations developing these technologies. Ethical guidelines must be established at both the national and international levels, ensuring that AI and biotechnology are used for the common good and not for destructive purposes. We also need to invest in education and research that focuses on the ethical implications of these technologies, preparing future generations to navigate the challenges of an increasingly tech-driven world. On an individual level, we can advocate for responsible AI and biotech policies, supporting organizations and movements that seek to ensure these technologies benefit society rather than harm it. The Renaissance spirit calls on us to embrace reason and wisdom, using technology as a tool for progress, not destruction. By prioritizing human dignity and the well-being of future generations, we can guide the development of AI and biotechnology toward positive outcomes. As with every other issue we've discussed, the key lies in cooperation. The unchecked pursuit of technological advancement for profit or power threatens to tip us into a future where humanity loses control over its creations. But with thoughtful regulation and a commitment to the common good, we can harness these technologies to create a brighter, more equitable world. At the core of every crisis we've explored, from climate change and war to inequality and technological risks, lies a simple truth. We cannot solve these problems alone. Cooperation, both at the individual and global levels, is the key to navigating the challenges of the 21st century. Yet cooperation seems to be the very thing that is breaking down. Political divisiveness, tribalism, and a lack of media literacy are driving people apart, while international institutions like the United Nations struggle to manage global conflicts because of the infighting in the Security Council. We find ourselves at a tipping point where the failure to cooperate could have devastating consequences for humanity's future. Cooperation, or the lack thereof, determines how we respond to every challenge we face. Consider the ongoing climate crisis. Individual countries have made strides in reducing emissions, but without coordinated global action, these efforts fall short of the drastic changes needed to prevent environmental catastrophe. The same is true for conflict resolution, as seen in the escalating tensions in the Middle East and Ukraine. Diplomacy and peacekeeping efforts are often hampered by competing interests and an unwillingness to compromise. On a smaller scale, the breakdown of cooperation is evident in how we treat one another in daily life, from the grocery store to the public square. The tipping point of cooperation is dangerously close. The global rise of authoritarianism, political polarization, and the concentration of media power has deepened mistrust in institutions and between individuals. At a time when collective action is more important than ever, people are retreating into echo chambers guided by misinformation and fear. This failure to communicate, to listen, and to work together threatens to derail progress on every front. Without cooperation, efforts to combat climate change will be fragmented, peace initiatives will falter, and the dangers of unchecked technology and inequality will only intensify. The doomsday clock, a powerful symbol of humanity's proximity to global catastrophe, is shaped by our ability or inability to cooperate. In the past, moments of international unity, such as the signing of nuclear arms reduction treaties, have moved the clock away from midnight. But in recent years, the breakdown of global diplomacy, the erosion of democratic norms, and the rise of populism have inched the clock closer to disaster. Cooperation, or the lack of it, is the defining issue that will either push the clock forward or buy us more time. But there is hope. The Renaissance spirit reminds us that cooperation is not only possible, it is essential. History has shown that humanity can come together in times of crisis. The rebuilding of Europe after World War II, NATO, the United Nations, and international collaborations on public health, like the fight against polio, all demonstrate the power of collective action. Civic virtue, reason, and compassion are the pillars of cooperation, and they are the values that must guide us now. So, how can we reignite a spirit of cooperation in such divided times? First, we must engage with one another more thoughtfully. This means listening, understanding different perspectives, and finding common ground in our shared humanity. On a societal level, media literacy and education are critical. People need the tools to critically evaluate information and avoid the traps of misinformation and political manipulation. Governments and institutions must prioritize transparency and accountability, rebuilding trust with citizens and fostering a culture of dialogue. Internationally, we need stronger global governance. The challenges we face are not confined by borders, and neither should our solutions be. From climate agreements to conflict resolution frameworks, global cooperation is the only way forward. We must strengthen organizations like the United Nations and create new platforms for international collaboration that address 21st century challenges like AI governance and environmental sustainability. At the individual level, we can all play a role. By becoming more engaged in civic life, participating in local and global initiatives, and advocating for policies that promote unity and cooperation, we help tip the scales toward a more cooperative and just world. The Renaissance spirit calls on us to reject divisiveness and embrace reason and compassion in every interaction, whether on the world stage or in our own communities. An easy way to play a role is by interacting with people face-to-face and depolarizing from within. How often do you bond with friends? Do you label others? And if so, be cognizant and stop the practice. This is our moment. History will be watching. The decisions we make today about cooperation, compassion, and the common goodwill shape the future of our world. Will we rise to the occasion, working together to solve the great challenges of our time? Or will we retreat into division, leaving future generations to inherit the fractured world we created? The Renaissance spirit, the guiding philosophy of this channel, asks each of us to take up the mantle of responsibility. Through knowledge, reason, and a deep commitment to justice, we can become the solution to the issues facing us today. From climate change to social inequality, from technological risks to global conflict, our future depends on our ability to come together in pursuit of a better world. Thank you for watching. The Renaissance spirit is dedicated to these ideals, a just, equitable, and humanitarian world grounded in the values of civic virtue, reason, and compassion. Here we explore history, politics, society, and culture, drawing lessons from the past to inform a brighter future. Just as the Renaissance ushered in an age of enlightenment and progress, we too can create a golden age if we act together. Please subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this journey of knowledge, growth, and unity with others. Let us continue this dialogue with the past and the future, finding inspiration in the lessons of those who came before us and responsibility in the legacy we will leave behind. Live the Renaissance spirit. History has not died, only our understanding of it.